Hello everyone, and welcome to another Breath Space video. My name is Dr. Brad. In this video, I want to address what I believe is often an undiscussed environmental issue that's impacting the health and practices of every yogi, meditator, biohacker, and health enthusiast out there: air pollution. I see a lot of social influencers out there touting the healing power of breathing, much like myself. But what if those practices are contributing rather than improving the quality of your health? I'm going to be addressing my own cognitive dissonance here and providing a lot of information. I'm going to define air pollution, discuss statistics on health, and end with just some practices you can do to protect yourself. But this issue is so much bigger than what we can do for our own individual health. I wanted to present this information for all those people out there who are doing the right things. They're exercising, they're meditating, they're breathing, and yet they're surprised to find that they're still suffering from some health issues, not just respiratory ones, but as you will soon hear about, a host of other physical and mental health issues. So, we're going to cover a lot. Sit back, take a breath, and let's begin. For several years, I lived in a lovely townhome just steps away from Green Lake. It's a lake in the north end of Seattle with a 3.1-mile loop trail around it, where people walk, bike, and skate, and during the summer months, they canoe, paddleboard, or swim. Every morning, regardless of whether or not I walked around the lake, I would go to my rooftop deck, weather permitting, and I could easily spend an hour or two doing some yoga, meditation, or breath work. Now, during the gray and drizzle that accompanied the rest of the year, which was about 9 months, I would sit beneath the overhang of my deck, wrapped in blankets, and meditate and breathe. Now, these images are actually from my Lake Forest Park place, not my Green Lake townhome. But at Green Lake, right? This was good stuff, right? I was building my resilience, practicing mindfulness, strengthening my vagal tone, and I was blessed to be able to do so outside in the safety and privacy of my own home. Well, to all you breath workers and biohackers and meditators listening, this routine, specifically breathing outside on my rooftop deck in the early morning hours, may not have been the healthiest of practices. For what I never considered during all those years of practice was that my townhouse was situated exactly 0.6 miles from a major freeway, I-5, to my east, and 0.3 miles from State Route 99 to my west. Well, I've been a naturopathic physician and meditation teacher and breath worker for quite some time now. It wasn't until a few years ago, during one of the first summers that I could remember in Seattle, when the smoke from wildfires miles away turned our skies orange-red, and there was a strong scent of perpetual campfire in the air, that I began to question the most important aspect of breath work: the quality of the air we breathe. Doctors and nutritionists love to talk about the quality of food and water we take into our bodies. You know, the dirty dozen, the clean 15. But what about the quality of the air? If the average person breathes around 10 to 16 breaths per minute, that's about 20 to 26,000 breaths per day, and that's about 7 to 9 million breaths per year. That's approximately 35 pounds of air that move in and out of our lungs every day, which is more than 6 times our weight in food. If I pause and think about it, none of the information I'm about to share really comes as a surprise. I'm not really shocked to discover how, for many of the people, especially those around the globe of lower socioeconomic status, the air they breathe may be killing them. So let's start with some statistics. And if I may say so, these happen to take my breath away. So a study published February 17th, 2007 in The Lancet showed that by the time children in Southern California who lived 500 meters, and that's about a third of a mile, from a freeway since the age of 10, reached 18 years of age, they had significant lung dysfunction compared to those who lived over 1 mile away, or 1,500 meters. And this study from the Keck School of Medicine of the University of Southern California provided some initial parameters. Living 1 mile or more away from a freeway is beneficial, if not necessary, for respiratory health. Well, I lived within that deleterious range on both sides of me. 3 years later, in 2010, a special panel from the Health Effects Institute, or HEI, performed a comprehensive review of over 700 worldwide studies looking at the impact of exposure to traffic-related air pollution from motor vehicle emissions on health. Again, their findings supported the conclusion that the critical zone was between 300 to 500 meters from any major freeway or road. Disturbingly, within North America, 30 to 45% of people living in large cities reside within that zone. But take heart, it's not just North America. Dutch studies conducted in 2011 found that long-term exposure to traffic-related air pollution may contribute to the development of COPD, and this likelihood was greater in those who already were susceptible, such as people with asthma or diabetes. A Swedish study published in the Environmental Health Perspectives in 2019 showed that long-term exposure to high levels of air pollution from traffic exhaust in one's own neighborhood increased the risk of stroke, even if the pollution levels overall in the area were low. Now, in 2016, professor and director of the UCLA Center for Clean Air, Suzanne Paulson, and her colleagues discovered that this 500-meter zone wasn't enough. Other factors, such as wind patterns, freeway designs, time of day, and types of vehicles, all impact how far air pollution drifts. These researchers found that pollution can travel up to 1 mile or more from its source. So buildings and other structures, as well as the surrounding terrain, can also function as either a barrier, which blocks pollution drift, or an accumulator, trapping it in the surrounding areas. While study after study show how people living within that 500 to even 1,000-meter range from traffic have the highest rates of general mortality, asthma, respiratory infections, strokes, heart attacks, cancer, preterm births, and even autism. This new evidence calls into question, what is exactly a safe pollution-free zone? Yes, local, state, and national regulations to control pollution have done wonders at transforming the overall air quality in some areas, such as specific parts of Los Angeles. The issue of air quality and safety continues to mount, both in the U.S. and globally. As I mentioned, some regulatory controls have decreased certain types of pollution, while others are on the rise. And as much as we may not wish to admit this, it doesn't affect everyone equally. Approximately 92% of overall pollution-related deaths globally occur in low-income and middle-income countries. And this number includes all sources of pollution, so that's contaminated air, contaminated water, contaminated soil. According to a 2015 report, exposure to all these forms of pollution account for 9 million premature deaths per year, which is 16% of all global deaths. That's 3 times as many deaths as from AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria combined. And I'd like to add, it's 15 times as many deaths as from war and all forms of violence. Regarding air quality, the World Health Organization estimates that 7 million people worldwide die prematurely from air pollution alone. And that's a figure some researchers claim is quite conservative. So this total, the 7 million, is greater than deaths related to alcohol. So it's 2 times higher than those related to alcohol. Motor vehicle accidents, that's 5 times higher than motor vehicle accidents. But also obesity and high sodium diets or child and maternal malnutrition. India and China account for 1/2 of the air pollution related deaths globally. And a 2020 study published in the Proceedings of National Academy of Sciences suggested that between the years 2000 and 2016, more than 30.8 million people in China died prematurely due to breathing polluted air. But what are we talking about here when we say air pollution? As I dove into the research, I was surprised to learn how uneducated I was about the topic. I was unaware that the EPA, or Environmental Protection Agency, had established a list of 6 common air pollutants known as criteria air pollutants in their Clean Air Act. Now, there are 3 factors that determine the severity of any air pollutant: the chemical nature, the concentration, and the persistence. So let's review the 6 common air pollutants. The first is nitrogen dioxide, or NO2. Nitrogen dioxide is but one of a group of highly reactive gases that contain nitrogen. Other gases in this group are nitrous acid and nitric acid. The main source of NO2 comes from burning fossil fuels, again, mainly from vehicles and power plants. When inhaled, NO2 can lead to respiratory disorders such as asthma, COPD, by irritating the lining of the respiratory tract. These nitrogen gases can react with other chemicals in the air to create 2 other pollutants that I will touch upon in a moment: ozone and particulate matter, thereby perpetuating the cycle of air pollution. When nitrogen gases combine with water and oxygen and other chemicals in the atmosphere, they produce acid rain, which then leads to toxicity in soil and water. And next, we have ozone. Now, depending upon where you find it, increased levels of ozone can be either beneficial or harmful. In the atmosphere, ozone is a positive thing, since the stratospheric ozone protects the Earth from harmful radiation. And as many of us have heard for years, the hole in stratospheric ozone layer is continuing to grow. This image from September 2020 shows that the hole over the Antarctic has peaked and has now reached 24 million square kilometers, the highest over the last decade. On the other hand, we have another form of ozone, and it's called ground-level ozone, or tropospheric ozone. And it's created when nitrogen oxides and other volatile organic compounds, or what we call VOCs, are exposed to sunlight and heat. You get more tropospheric ozone generated on hotter and sunnier days, and it can be carried quite far from the source of the nitrogen emissions by wind. Ground-level ozone irritates the lining of the respiratory tract, resulting in chest pain, coughing, and inflammation. Any source of nitrogen oxide gases and volatile organic compounds lead to the generation of ground-level ozone, and that includes motor vehicle exhaust, industrial and manufacturing facilities that burn fuel, but also gasoline vapors and chemical solvents, which are a source of VOCs. So, a few words about VOCs, volatile organic compounds. You might be surprised that there are two classifications of VOCs, as I was. There's biogenic VOCs and anthropogenic VOCs. Biogenic VOCs are chemicals emitted from plants, animals, fungi, and even microbes. They're emitted from leaves, and the ones that are emitted from leaves of plants are known as foliar VOCs. And foliar VOCs, as the Botanical Society of America points out in their article Demystifying the Study of Volatile Organic Plant Compounds, that one specific group, known as isoprene, adds about 600 million tons of carbon to the atmosphere each year. That's greater than the amount of carbon from all sources of methane combined. As the article points out, foliar VOCs are vital to the life of a plant. They are released when leaves are damaged, and that's responsible for that smell of freshly cut grass you get. They are the chemicals that make Christmas trees so easily flammable. They're responsible for either attracting pollinators or sending chemical signals to other plants and animals about predators in the area. In wildfires, there are two types of VOCs that are emitted. There are guaiacols that are methoxyphenols, primarily from softwoods, and the syringols that are dimethoxyphenols, both from hardwood and softwoods. Don't need to know that. And while still a concern, biogenic VOCs are not our main focus. From the 189 hazard air pollutants, HAPs, that the EPA has listed, a whopping 97 are anthropogenic. Anthropogenic VOCs are created by chemical process industries, or CPIs. So the processing and distributing plants for many forms of chemicals, specifically paint and other solvents, pesticides, also other building materials, increase VOCs. Studies have shown that indoor levels of VOCs can be 2 to 5 times, even up to 10 times higher than outdoor levels, depending upon what you have in your home. Typical culprits that emit VOCs through off-gassing are paints and solvents, but also aerosol sprays, household cleaners and disinfectants, dry cleaned clothing, furniture and carpets, air fresheners, and pesticides. Home crafting projects can be a major source of VOCs if they have glues and adhesives, if you're using permanent markers, and even the chemicals you use for photography. But what about the office? Is it safer? Well, for many of us who are working from home, our home is now our office, but the office contains many sources of VOC emissions, especially from copiers and printers, but also carbonless copy paper. And many people have that in their checkbooks. So exposure to VOCs can irritate the eyes, nose, and throat, leading to difficulty breathing, causing headaches and dizziness and fatigue, allergic reactions. You could develop loss of consciousness, loss of coordination. It's been known to lead to nausea, liver, kidney, and central nervous system damage, vomiting and bloody noses, and some VOCs are known carcinogens in animals. The debate is whether that is also applicable to humans. Think about that. Next, we have carbon monoxide, and this is released whenever anything is burned. However, the cause for alarm is when it's within the home or an enclosed space without good ventilation. Because carbon monoxide is colorless and odorless, you're not likely to detect it until you experience symptoms like confusion and dizziness, or worse yet, unconsciousness and even death. All home methods for heating and cooking can turn deadly if unvented. That includes gas or kerosene space heaters, fireplaces with cracks or blocked chimneys, leaky furnaces, or poorly vented gas stoves. Carbon monoxide binds to red blood cells, displacing necessary oxygen, which then gets transported to vital organs that are starved for that necessary oxygen. So let's talk about the next air pollutant that I was unaware of was still a problem: lead. Lead becomes an air pollutant during the processing and manufacturing of ore and metal, and the highest concentration of lead pollution in the air is typically around lead smelters. Other contributors to this type of air pollution include lead battery manufacturers, but also water incinerators and utility production. The U.S. has seen a 98% reduction in lead air pollution between the years of 1980 and 2014 after the regulations were introduced by the EPA to remove lead from gasoline. As with toxicity from ingested sources, lead gets distributed throughout the entire body. It binds to red blood cells, and that can cross the underdeveloped blood-brain barrier, causing a host of neurological conditions, specifically in children. In children, it affects their developing hippocampus, which then leads to learning and memory deficits, lowered IQ, and behavioral problems. Lead binds to NMDR receptors, blocking glutamate. Nitric oxide synthase levels increase while calcium levels decrease. As levels of brain-derived neurotropic factors decrease, causing cell death. Inhaling lead air pollution impacts not just the brain and the nervous system, but also the immune, reproductive, and cardiovascular systems, as well as disrupting kidney function. Inhaling lead pollution can lead to fatigue, headaches, nausea, depression, constipation, numbness and pain in the extremities, hypertension, decreased sex drive and sperm count, and even spontaneous miscarriages. Next, we have sulfur dioxide. Like nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen gases, there's an entire group of sulfur oxide gases. Yet the main concern is sulfur dioxide, or SO2, since it is found in the greatest concentration. Yet sulfur dioxide in the air leads to the generation of other sulfur oxides. The consistent pattern we are seeing here is that the main source of sulfur dioxide is industrial facilities and power plants that burn fossil fuels, and from manufacturing and processing plants that extract metal from ore. Now, a natural source of sulfur dioxide is a volcano. Overall, sulfur dioxide in the air makes breathing so difficult, especially to people who are already predisposed to respiratory difficulties, like those with asthma and COPD. And when sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere interacts with other compounds, it can generate this next important air pollutant, our sixth one. And that is ambient fine particulate matter. Now, there's something just called ambient fine particulate matter, but we also have particulate matter 2.5. So ambient fine particulate matter is known as PM, but then we also have PM 2.5, which stands for particulate matter smaller than 2.5 micrometers. And that's about a 30th the width of a human hair. There's particulate matter even smaller, which is called ultrafine particles, or UFPs. And while no amount of particulate material is safe to breathe, the EPA has set the acceptable limits to around 12 micrograms per cubic meter. And all in all, particulate matter alone, PM alone, is responsible for a large number of premature deaths, illnesses, and diseases around the globe. 85% of all airborne ambient fine particulate air pollution comes from fossil fuel combustion, such as vehicles, but also manufacturing plants, and those tend to occur more often in higher income countries. and from burning biomasses such as plant matter, dung, wood, coal for intercooking, which occurs more commonly in lower income countries. Forest fires, dust storms are a natural source of ambient fine particulate air pollution. And this image just is here to remind us about the air pollution that develops from those wildfires. And this is a picture from San Francisco last year, 2020, taken from San Francisco during those wildfires. So moving on to talk about another form of PM particulate material is black carbon, also known as soot. And it's created mainly through the incomplete combustion of fossil fuels, biofuel and diesel, and even biomass. So rather than turning into carbon dioxide, which would occur if the combustion was complete, what is left in this incomplete process is black carbon, carbon monoxide, volatile organic compounds, and organic carbon. Now that said, black carbon is considered a short-term pollutant because its lifespan is only about a few days to weeks after it's created. And in that time, its impacts can be significant. In 2015 alone, about 6.6 million tons of black carbon were emitted into the atmosphere, of which 58% is attributed to household cooking and heating. Transportation only accounts for about 26%, agriculture 8%, and industrial production 5%. So perhaps you have noticed I have yet to mention carbon dioxide. And that's because carbon dioxide is not an air pollutant. It's a naturally occurring gas that accounts for less than 1% of atmospheric gases. As you know, every mammal exhales it, and plants use it for photosynthesis. Half of the Earth's carbon dioxide is absorbed by trees as well as the ocean, and that's why deforestation is so damaging. It reduces the amount of carbon dioxide that can be removed from the atmosphere, and that amount that is not absorbed, that is not removed, can stay in the atmosphere for thousands of years, fueling the climate crisis by increasing the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect is when heat and radiation gets trapped on the surface of the Earth, increasing the chemical reactions that produce other air pollutants, ozone and air pollutants, particulate material. The major emitter of carbon dioxide are not only vehicles, but power plants that burn coal, mining, chemical production, and manufacturing. Because of its ability to absorb light, the impact of black carbon for trapping heat and warming the climate has been estimated to be about 460 to 1,500 times stronger than carbon dioxide. Now, during the pandemic, many assumed that with less air travel and car travel, carbon dioxide levels would lower. However, the readings from atop Mauna Loa volcano in Hawaii measured carbon dioxide levels in the air to be about 0.5 percentage point higher in May of this year, 2021, and that measured at 419 parts per million than the levels in May 2020. So the amount of carbon dioxide levels in the air increased 0.5 percentage point. And that's according to two separate evaluations, one from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the other from Scripps Institution of Oceanography. So, even though 2020 had a dip by 5.8% in carbon dioxide that was emitted globally, and this is due to the reduction in manufacturing, industry, and transportation, this did very little to the total amount of carbon dioxide built up in the atmosphere. Keep in mind that more than 31 billion tons of carbon was emitted in 2020, but we still had a 5.8% drop. And the atmosphere is still rising in carbon dioxide levels by 0.5%. Now that's carbon dioxide. Now, if we go back and focus solely on ambient fine particulate matter, and not all sources of pollution, according to the Global Burden of Disease study published in 2015, exposure to outdoor particulate matter is considered the fifth leading risk factor for death around the globe. And that accounts to 4.2 million deaths per year, about 103.1 million disability-adjusted life years for 2015. Being so small, particulate material can cross into the bloodstream, damaging the blood-brain barrier, stimulating inflammation, and affecting every body system. PM has been detected in tissues throughout the body, from the brain to the heart to the lung to the placenta. A 2019 study concluded that globally, the percentage of deaths from PM 2.5 in polluted air by ailments were 40% COPD, 30% lower respiratory infections, 26% stroke, 20% ischemic heart disease, 20% diabetes, 20% neonatal deaths, 19% lung cancer. As previously stated, air pollution does not seem to spare any part of the body. Particulate material and gases can lead to a host of conditions. Respiratory ailments, because pollution irritates the airways, increasing inflammation, which then can cause coughing, shortness of breath, and asthma. Exposure to air contaminants increase the risk of developing chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, and certain types of lung cancer. For those with pre-existing conditions, pollutants can worsen all of them. Cardiovascular disease. Particulate matter has been implicated in increasing inflammation. You'll hear that repeatedly. But it's also implicated in hardening the arteries, increasing blood clots, causing plaques to rupture. And that results in myocardial infarctions, heart attacks, and strokes. Particulate material exposure has been associated with arrhythmias, hypertension, and congestive heart failure. What if the air you're breathing is leading to some of your ailments? Particulate material has been implicated in metabolic diseases. One study by the University of Southern California demonstrated that pollutants can cause damage to the pancreas, and that results in diabetes that can contribute to obesity, which in turn leads to more cardiovascular disease. It keeps cycling. In the brain and the nervous system, chronic exposure to breathing sulfur dioxide, nitrogen dioxide, and all particulate material damage the blood-brain barrier. Lead, allowing for toxins to reach the brain where they wreak havoc. Cognitive function becomes impaired, and brain alterations ensue that can lead to Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Reproductive, overall fertility decreases with chronic exposure to pollutants. How many times when you talk about reproductive health are we talking about air pollution? Particulate matter has been found in placental tissue, and exposure decreases the likelihood of carrying to term, to premature births, to low birth weight, and respiratory disease in children. Prolonged exposure to air pollution may affect fetal brain development, leading to learning disabilities and cognitive issues. Renal function. Interestingly, or not, chronic kidney disease, which has higher rates in urban dwellers, is associated with exposure to PM air pollution. And of course, cancer. The links with numerous cancers, in addition to lung. So I'm talking about colon, kidney, stomach, and even childhood leukemia, have been seen with long-term exposure to air pollutants. But air pollution is not impacting everyone equally. People with predisposing medical conditions such as cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, those with lower socioeconomic status, the disenfranchised, people who lack social support, and people who lack access to medical services are all suffering more than others. A study published in the Science Advances in April 2021 revealed that racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic minorities had the highest exposure to PM 2.5. And the authors claim that this is the largest environmental cause of human mortality. They state that between 85,000 to 200,000 deaths every year in the United States can be attributed to ambient fine particulate air pollution. The cost would be over $886 billion a year to manage the health impacts of this. Even amidst the changes in regulations and industries in this country, these disparities still abound. The New York Times published an article on April 28, 2021, discussing the study, in which they stated that Black Americans are exposed to more pollution from every type of source, including industry, agriculture, all manner of vehicles, construction, residential sources, and even emissions from restaurants. Yet all people of color are exposed to particulate material and pollution from every source, as this graph from the New York Times article shows. These differences, it should be noted, were not based on just national averages, but also on the state level and across income levels and across urban and rural divides. As professor at Texas Southern University, Robert Bullard states, we need to address this environmental racism. Hispanics in California are disproportionately exposed to air pollutants from agriculture. California, as you may know, produces about a third of the vegetables and 2/3 of the fruit and nuts in the United States. In the Inland Empire, which is a region in Southern California where Amazon has a high number of warehouses that sit right next to homes and schools, the large Latino population there are exposed to high levels of PM 2.5 created from diesel vehicles coming in and out of warehouses. Add to this the federally backed mortgage and credit practices that have prevented people of color from buying homes in many other neighborhoods across the country, as well as the fact that many highways are built right through communities of color. It's no wonder Black and Hispanic Americans are disproportionately inhaling fine particulate material. Now, another recent study showed that both in Oakland, California, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, my hometown, emissions from commercial kitchens, from cooking oils, resulted in a large fraction of particulate air pollution in those cities. And of course, more people of color tended to live near those commercial kitchens. However, white Americans too are impacted by air pollution, yet their main sources tend to be different, and it's based on where people are living. Particulate material from coal-burning power plants are the main source that affect whites disproportionately on average, and white Americans tend to be only slightly more exposed to particulate pollution from agriculture, and that's a result of soy tilling and window racing. Yet, short-term exposure to air pollution is also a serious health risk. It's not just this long-term exposure day in and day out. In a study published in May 2021 in the Journal of Nature Aging, researchers showed that the greater the short-term exposure to PM 2.5, the greater the cognitive decline. However, the adverse effects were reduced in participants who were using nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories and aspirin. Now, caution should be mentioned as the study only included 954 white men, so it was not a heterogeneous group, and so we don't know the short-term impacts of exposure to air pollution on other populations, women and people of color. One aside reported in the New York Times piece about this study that I found truly fascinating was that during the study period, the PM 2.5 levels in Boston, where the study was conducted, were measured around 10.77 micrograms per cubic meter, and that is fairly close to the 12 microgram cutoff level determined by the EPA. Other forms of short-term exposure to air pollution include wildfires, that new normal here on the West Coast, but charcoal grilling, secondhand smoke, traffic-related pollution, and smog, all of which continue to have serious impacts for overall health. Research presented at the European Respiratory Society International Congress in 2019 showed that in the Greater London area, professional drivers were exposed to higher levels of black carbon, partly due to the high rate of diesel fuel from older vehicles in Europe. As I mention these numbers, remember that this is not overall PM2.5, but specifically black carbon. So that means overall particulate material levels would be even greater. So this study showed that the level of black carbon in these 140 subjects, small group, that the taxi drivers suffered the worst. They were exposed to about 6 times the levels of black carbon. That's 6.5 micrograms per cubic meter of air, while driving compared to their home levels, which were measured at 1.1 micrograms. These levels could peak at times exceeding 100 micrograms per cubic meter and could last for up to 30 minutes. So for other professional level drivers, the levels were about 4 times higher than their home level, measuring around 4.1 micrograms. Interestingly, emergency service workers, EMS workers, had the lowest rate of all professional drivers, clocking in around 2.8 micrograms. The researchers speculated this was due to the fact that ambulances don't have to wait in standstill traffic. They can keep going. They don't need to stop at traffic lights. Regardless, this is still elevated. Oh, what about pedestrians? Well, levels of black carbon on the average busy London street was measured at 3.1 micrograms, while away from the street, the levels dropped to 0.9 micrograms per cubic meter. The suggestion of researchers: close your windows while driving in highly congested traffic areas, especially if in standstill traffic, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So just to drive the point home, if I may, numerous articles and studies are coming out about how traffic-related pollution is linked to poor health. This, of course, was done in mice, and yet we have a number of studies on humans showing how exposure to traffic-related air pollution leads to poor health. Long-term exposure to air pollution is impacting our health. So let's talk about something that's been on a lot of people's minds lately: COVID-19. According to a study done by biostatistician Francesca Dominici, author of and director of the Data Science Initiative at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, for people living in the most polluted cities in the world, such as in China and other East Asian countries, exposure to air pollution is associated with an 27% increase in COVID-19 mortality on average. For those living in the U.S. cities that have the worst air quality over the past 15 to 17 years, air pollution is associated with an 8% increase in COVID-19 mortality rates on average. The original study initially reported a 15% increase, but that has since been revised and readjusted. And now, if we know what's going on in India, if India and China have the highest rate, or India and China take into consideration half of all air pollution in the world globally, is it any wonder about the levels of COVID mortality? So if I might drive the point home, Numerous articles and numerous studies are coming out that are showing that traffic-related pollution are linked to a host of illnesses. This one is done in mice, but that doesn't matter. We have numerous studies done on human beings showing that the long-term exposure and short-term exposure to traffic-related air pollution is damaging to our health. So why don't we talk about something that's been on everybody's mind for the past year? As for COVID-19, according to a study done by biostatistician Francesca Dominici, who's author and director of the Data Science Initiative at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, for people living in the most polluted cities in the world, such as China and India, exposure to air pollution has been associated with a 27% increase in COVID-19 mortality on average. Okay, what about the U.S.? For those living in U.S. cities that have the worst air qualities over the past 15 to 17 years, air pollution is associated with an 8% increase in COVID-19 mortality rates on average. Now, the study initially reported when it was published a 15% increase, but that has since been readjusted. Still, it's an 8% increase. We are not just talking about outdoor air quality here. Air pollution in the home, especially with poor ventilation, especially in developing countries, is a huge concern. Many people assume that the quality of indoor air, whether in their home or their office, is cleaner than outside air. And this assumption can be false, again, depending upon where you live and your method for heating your home. According to statistics from the Institute of Health, Metrics, and Evaluations, in 2017, 6% of all deaths in low-income countries resulted from indoor air pollution. That's about 1.6 million people dying prematurely. That's 3% of global deaths. That said, the good news, if we can call it that, is that since 1990, the number has dropped by 1 million. So before 1990, it was 2.6 million people died prematurely. When it comes to indoor air pollution, the main causes seem to be the source. When it comes to indoor air pollution, the main causes seem to be sources that release gas or particulate material into the air. As already stated, people in poor nations rely on combustion of solid fuels for indoor heating and cooking. And add to that ill-equipped ventilation, and their air quality is atrocious. Ventilation. Ventilation is a process where outdoor air can enter the room and dilute the air concentration. And that's usually through doors and windows. Infiltration, on the other hand, is where air is creeping in or out of the building due to cracks in the foundation or the walls or the door frames. So ventilation is a bigger process. Many people do not realize that they are dealing with infiltration because of these cracks. And if the outdoor air pollution is higher, it will creep into your building. So ventilation allows for that outdoor air to enter the room and dilute the toxic gas levels people are inhaling, and tightly sealed buildings without adequate ventilation systems are a formula for poor health. And in addition to combustion systems, think about the other sources that can be contributing to indoor air pollution, like VOCs, which I mentioned earlier. And those come from your home furnishings, your carpet, your furniture, your building material, if it is not organic, if it's not sustainable. Many people don't realize the toxic chemicals that are put in clothing and bedding. Your cleaning material, of course. Many people don't realize they're hygiene products. And what's most surprising to people are cosmetics. Cosmetics are a large source of VOC emissions. Some supposedly green products have been found to emit particulate material as well. Now, something I found quite disheartening and disturbing was a prospective study done in 2008 with over 61,000 Singapore Chinese that showed an increased exposure to indoor air pollutants was associated with significant increase in upper respiratory cancers. Well, what were they looking at? They showed that the greater the use of incense, there was an association with an increased risk of squamous cell carcinoma in the entire respiratory tract. I've been using incense for decades when I've done yoga, and often with my windows closed. So while candle and incense burning has been shown to emit particulate material below that of cooking, the amount range widely depending on the source material of your candles or incense. Many of them contain toxic substances like lead. Still, in a poorly ventilated area, indoor air pollution will rise. So what can we do about all our exposure? What can we do about our exposure to outdoor air pollutants? If you're like me, you might not have been aware that your daily breathing practice could be leading to more harm than good. I know a number of people who get up in the morning, go outside into the fresh air to do some vigorous, forced hyperventilation processes, drawing the air into their lungs because they're told that will be good for them. Where are you doing this? For most of us, picking up and moving isn't an option. However, if in the process of moving, either buying or renting a new home, if at all possible, pick a place as far from city centers as possible, or at least areas that have barriers such as hills or mountains, or even other buildings that create a barrier from you and potential pollution drift. So barriers that block the freeway rather than being in a canyon that capture air pollution. So ensure that the tall buildings are not surrounding you on all sides with the freeway in there. Before moving, you might want to check the status of the air quality index through services like the EPA's Air Now site or IQ Air. These websites, they also have smartphone apps, allow you to select your location and determine your current PM 2.5 levels and your ozone levels, and check it various times throughout the day as the levels change within a 24-hour cycle. Note the ground level ozone, especially if you suffer from medical conditions like asthma. If the air quality index, the AQI, is above 100, or if there's an ozone alert, stay indoors with your windows closed. Going outside with a commercial face mask does not protect you from small, fine air particulate material. The New York Times has their own website that you can click in and you can put in your own zip code so that you can compare the air quality in your air. And this is what I did the other day for my home. It talked about the floating particulate material. And it showed that what was the air quality like in the past. It could compare it to what was happening last year in California during those wildfires. And you can see how it compares to other areas in the world. And you can see a interactive screen here, it's not moving, about a year of fine particulate pollution. It shows you the flow of it. As Paulson's research determined, pollution that drifted from traffic can be higher for several hours before sunrise. And that's because the cooling that occurs at night traps freeway pollution closer to the ground and then allow it to travel downwind for a mile. So certain types of air pollution, such as nitrogen dioxide and ultrafine particles from exhaust, are higher during morning hours. Morning rush hour, of course, and only disperse once the ground warms up after the sun has risen for several hours and the wind disperses it. So, for that very reason, avoid exercising early in the morning, especially if you're doing so 1 mile from traffic. You might be inclined to exercise in the morning because it's cooler, but keep in mind that cooler air causes pollution to remain stagnant in the area where you are. If commuting, Do what you can to limit exhaust. Of course, we could talk about riding a bus or ride shares or driving electric when possible. But if you are in commuting traffic, keep your windows closed and turn on the air conditioning, but set it on recirculate rather than pooling in outside air. Fortunately, more and more people are coming to realize that it's not just the outdoors that we have to be concerned about, that household air pollution is actually killing us. There are several devices on the market, and this is one that I have. I'm not endorsing it. There's many out there. There's the IQ Air, and they have a website where you can check your air quality in your region. But they also have this home device, and this is My Levels This Morning. It will measure whatever room you're in and tell you what the air quality index is, and if you put in your location, it will tell you what the air quality is like outside. I like to have this around because I can see the impacts of what I'm doing on air quality. We had our carpets professionally cleaned, and I could see what that did. Of course, we did a natural source, and so it didn't really affect the air quality. However, if you're doing any refurbishing, if you are doing any painting or cooking or burning incense, which I used to do, which I am no longer doing, if you don't do so with increasing natural ventilation by opening the windows, you'll see a drastic change in air quality. And I will tell you, since I got that monitor, when I cook, I can see my levels, my toxic levels raise. I can see the air quality go up into the red just within minutes of using a cast iron skillet with just a little bit of oil on high heat. I am breathing that in. So you want to make sure you have proper ventilation. Remember, ventilation, that's when the air flows through open windows and doors. Infiltration is when the movement of outdoor air comes into a building through poorly sealed door frames or window frames or cracks in the walls or the foundation or ceiling. So in times when there's poor air quality outside, you want to make sure to eliminate that infiltration. And when the air quality is better outside, you want to increase your ventilation. Both ventilation and infiltration are increased by air temperature differences between the two. Bottom line, air exchange is helpful if the amount of air pollution in the home is greater than that of the outdoor air surroundings. Now, during fire season, or if you live near a roadway or warehouses or manufacturing facilities, check those walls, doors, door frames, and cracks. If using a central air conditioning or heating system in your home, be sure to use air filters. However, windows and doors need to be closed or else you'll be drawing in air from the outside. And filters should be rated at 13 or higher on the MERV, or Minimum Efficiency Reporting Value scale. While air purifiers, in my opinion, are vital for maintaining clean home air index, their impacts are limited to the size of the room. Please buy a certified device that details exactly what and how much it filters. And sadly, the greater the amount of filtration, the greater the cost tends to be. And if you can only afford one unit, don't forget to move it into your bedroom every night before going to sleep. And remember, maintain the quality of your air filters by regularly replacing the filters and cleaning the overall units. Finally, make sure your home has functioning smoke, radon, and carbon monoxide detectors. Please don't forget to check your batteries. So thank you for listening. My main goal here was to remind us that the air we breathe is just as important as the water we take in, the food that we eat. Many people are going around doing deep breathing exercises. Please keep in mind, what's the source that you're taking into your body? What's the quality of the air that you are taking into your body? And as you do some of those vigorous forms of breath work, you're drawing that into your lungs. I appreciate you listening. Please reach out if you have any questions. And may you go gently, knowing your goodness.